Thanks, Royce.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Katie. So, yeah, it's great to be here with you all. My name's Royce. I am currently serving as the Department Chair of Educational Leadership and Foundations at Brigham Young University, where I'm also a professor of instructional psychology and technology. And my very provocative title today is AI Killed OER, Long Live OER. And this is the reason for this is I was in a board meeting a few months ago and someone started talking about OER because we were talking about a mission statement and kind of paths moving forward for our organization. And the comment was made that OER is a dated term and concept. And as I unpacked that a little bit with the person, it became clear. And I've heard this from multiple people now, even people who used to be very heavy into the OER movement, open education movement, that with AI, OER are no longer kind of necessary. It's no longer they're no longer an agent of change in education, and and kind of just being sucked into the AI mania as with everybody else. And so the idea is that with AI, we no longer need to worry about whether or not something is free or open. We can just use AI to create any educational material we want whenever we want. And if that's the case, then OER, open educational resources, lose their value. And so, just to give this position its full weight, I can see where this is coming from. So, if it's true that AI can generate relevant, localized, high quality content on the fly and at very low cost, then maybe OER and open education are no longer necessary. And I think this is where people who kind of have taken on this stance are operating from. Um, But I think it's worthwhile to take a step back and ask ourselves, why do we want OER and openness anyway? Why has this been an influence in the field? Why has this been something that many of us have worked with and around in our careers? And I think about myself. So I did my PhD in curriculum and instruction, focusing on instructional technology. I started with educational games and social media. But then I moved to openness because of all the kind of movements or opportunities for research that I was finding in educational technology. Openness spoke to me in a way that nothing else did. And OER is a manifestation of that openness. And the reason that it was so important was I felt like so much of ed tech was focused on shiny things, chasing after the next novel thing. But openness spoke to reshaping our institutions. And it seemed like a mechanism in my mind for helping us to fundamentally rethink what education is all about, which is what, Papert talks about as the whole reason for technology in education is to rethink our structures and to rethink some of the assumptions that we make about our educational processes and systems and to use technology as a mechanism for shaping the futures that we ultimately want. And so then the reason that I've been drawn to OER and openness are manifold, but here are a few of them. One is to ensure equity and educational access, that all people have equal opportunities to learn and to grow together, to provide high quality opportunities for all, to democratize knowledge so that those who are the ones creating knowledge or controlling knowledge are not isolated, few, elite, powerful, but that this is democratized across all people in all nations. Um, I've been drawn to OER as well to challenge power and economic structures that shape and limit learning opportunities. So it's not just trying to help individuals, but actually to counteract the systems that have led to individuals being marginalized in the past, to empower learners and communities, and to enable sharing and collaboration that transcends geographic, institutional, and socioeconomic silos. Um, and ultimately, I've also written about that I feel like OER is an openness is a mechanism for enthroning generosity as a central tenet of education and the work that we do. And so I feel like in so many ways, OER and openness represent the heart of education that I feel like we want and that I want to see our systems built around. And so the question then is, if this is why we are involved in OER and openness, is AI doing these things? Is it doing them well? Um, And so often I think what people are asking instead is, what is the future of OER in this brave new world of AI? Because we can generate things with AI, um, what is going to happen with OER? But I think that's the wrong question. I think a better question would be, how can OER and openness provide the vision of an AI future that we actually want? And why I think this is a better question is that OER and openness provide the heart or the vision for how to use technology and to shape society in positive ways that AI itself or alone is missing. So, and I think this is important because AI has some problems. And I know none of this will be new to you, but I'm just going to list out some of the problems that we're grappling with at a societal level with AI right now, including inequity, opaqueness, exploitation, bias, degradation, sycophancy, and unsustainability. So first of all, inequity, we see inequity in terms of who has access to learning materials, who has access to learning opportunities. And this plays out both in the tools that people have access to, their internet connectivity, their licenses that they have available to them to use tools and resources. So if we look at internet access across the world, this is not evenly distributed. People do not all have equal access to use tools like ChatGPT or Gemini. And that especially when we are relying upon AI for heavy bandwidth purposes, this becomes increasingly true as as strong access to broadband internet access is not equally distributed across the world. And as has been said many times, when it comes to tools on the internet, such as Facebook or Twitter or X, or now ChatGPT or Claude, there are free versions of these tools, but if you're not paying for something on the internet, you're typically not the customer, you're the product being sold. And all that's to say that even though many of these tools are available in some free model to us or some free approach, some free version, we are selling our data, we're selling ourselves in many ways, allowing our practices and our how we interact with the world to be shaped by these tools in ways that are problematic. Some recent conversations about this have been made in a variety of venues. So, for instance, the director of the NAACP has recently said Black, low-income, and other frontline communities already bear the burden of pollution, higher utility costs, and climate risk. The unchecked expansion of dirty AI data centers threatens to deepen these disparities. And I think specifically around the building of data centers, we've seen a lot of pushback or a lot of critique of the AI movement because of how it disproportionately affects different populations. And a researcher at Leiden University recently said AI functions as a form of digital colonialism, concentrating wealth among a global elite. Sorry, my light turned off. Primarily in the global north, while the global south suffers from dehumanizing working conditions and environmental consequences. Laborers in the global south endure unstable employment for low pay, supporting AI advancements while remaining unseen in the industry's narrative of progress. Concurrently, resource extraction and power-hungry AI data centers in the global south damage ecosystems already impacted by climate change. So this inequitably affects us. Here in in the United States, in my own state of Utah, there was recently just approved a new AI data center that is a 9 gigawatt data center. I believe it's currently the largest that's been announced in the world in Utah, but it's going to be here in Utah, or its plan is to be here in Utah. And they're moving forward on it, but it will take a few years for them to get some additional necessary permits that they need for it. And so this news release was just made on May 20th, but then the very next day, May 21st, our governor of Utah declared a national or a statewide emergency as our Utah drought worsens. The thing about Utah is it's a desert, and the Great Salt Lake is dwindling, and we've been in a drought for multiple years now. So why are we building 9 gigawatt data centers in a desert where we already have serious water problems? And the arguments for this are really existential arguments or existential issues that we're facing. So there are equity issues with AI, but ultimately many of these equity issues translate into even existential issues for many of us. Even the godfather of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, has predicted at different times that there's a 10% to 20% likelihood that AI will lead to human extinction. Some folks have argued it's higher to closer to 50%. And even many of the CEOs and leaders of companies building AI tools believe this as well. Some have said that this is closer to 50%. But the reason that they still move forward is it's a mentality similar to um, um, well, and this is even without AI being used for weaponry, which is a completely separate issue. But the this is very similar to like an arms race in the sense that during the Cold War, everyone knew that the building of nuclear weapons was could potentially lead to the destruction of the planet, but world powers continue to do it simply because they thought that they would be more responsible in their use than other people. And you hear the same kind of argument. So I hear this in Utah, for instance, when people push back and say we don't need a 9 gigawatt data center in the middle of the desert. The response is, well, if we don't do it, China will do it or someone else will do it. And so we are rushing toward this cliff that we recognize as a cliff simply because we want to be sure that even though it's a cliff, we want to be sure that we're the ones that get there first. Second problem is opaqueness. So with AI, we put in our input, we put in our prompts, and the AI operates as a black box, and that gives us output out of it. This opaqueness is twofold. One is part of it's intentional. So models like ChatGPT, for instance, are not open in the sense that we can't go look at their source code or their weights. But there's unintentional opaqueness around it as well, in that as AI models are trained, even the engineers themselves who build them don't necessarily understand all that has developed within the AI because it's so complex. And so there's a certain level of germane complexity going on that the most complex models, or even some of the simpler models, a trained engineer can't go in and even make sense of what has been trained inside the model. And so there's some necessary opaqueness to it. Um, some argued, and this is kind of old hat, but I'll at least mention it. Some used to argue that explainable AI was the solution to this. So basically, having AI generate output that it explains to us how it arrived at its conclusions. But this is really problematic for lots of reasons. That actually isn't very effective. Um, and there are kind of three ways of approaching explainable AI: intrinsic versus post hoc versus thinking. But all of these are really problematic. Intrinsic is the most reliable, but it's not possible with transformers and LLMs because they're not rule-based. They are weight-based. The model itself is not aware of why it's drawing the conclusions it is. Post hoc explainable AI. So basically asking AI a question, then asking the AI to explain to you why it drew the results that it did. It's less reliable. It can be done on any AI tool, but it's used primarily by developers for debugging. And then thinking approaches tend to not be very reliable, generally because they don't actually show us what it's doing. It's not showing us the internal reasoning path, but it's an imagined or hypothetical best guess of a rational explanation for why the AI drew the conclusion it did. So basically, you're applying a black box to understand what the black box output was. So you're just black box upon black box to try to understand what's going on. The third problem with AI is exploitation, as was mentioned in one of the previous quotes. Just human resources are being exploited to build systems and to maintain systems. Um, a recent quote again, by the same researcher at Leiden University: behind this sleek facade of AI, a deeply exploitative global labor structure underpins this development, one that remains largely invisible to the public. Far from being a fully autonomous technology, it's built on backs of so many workers in the global south who perform tedious and poorly compensated tasks like data labeling and content moderation. These tasks are indispensable to training AI systems, yet they are outsourced to low-wage workers in countries like India, Kenya, and the Philippines. Many AI systems rely on a vulnerable workforce performing repetitive tasks for low wages, often as low as $1.46 per hour after tax. In addition, as part of this exploitation, this goes hand in hand with intellectual property exploitation. For instance, ChatGPT was trained on many copyright restricted resources, including large-scale news sites, academic journals, books, copyrighted code, text from paid subscription services, and legal documents, patents, and standards. Even things like DALL-E, about 70 to 80% of the images used to train DALL-E can't be verified as copyright free. And so this is why it can replicate, for instance, Disney art with such fidelity is because it's trained on copyright restricted materials. Fourth problem with AI is bias. So a central tenet of computer and data science is garbage in, garbage out. So if you put garbage into a data system, if you put in garbage data, you're going to get garbage results. But what is often ignored is this applies to bias as well. If you put bias into a data system, you get bias out. Um, Kathy O'Neill in her book Weapons of Math Destruction, I think explains this really well. Some key quotes from that book include big data processes codify the past. They do not invent the future. So they take the past and make it and instantiate it into code that we then use to replicate what has happened in the past. So our own values and desires influence our choices from the data we choose to collect, the questions we ask. And so our models end up being opinions embedded in mathematics. And then ultimately, the human victims of these weapons of math destruction, as she describes them, we'll see time and again are held to a far higher standard of evidence than in the algorithms themselves. So we use these tools to impact the lives of humans, and then humans bear the burden of those of that, and we don't hold the same level of scrutiny to the tools that we use in creating them. And so we see these kinds of biases and problems show up in many ways, and everything from facial recognition to just output of a large language model. And so it's a result of a variety of things, including inadequate data. So if we train a data source for facial recognition, where we have fewer black faces, for instance, in our data set, then it will not do as well a good of a job as identifying people with darker skin tone. But even beyond that, though, if we're training it on data that is the result of systemic bias, so for instance, the United States over incarceration of African Americans. If we're training AI on data related to incarceration rates, then it will overpredict or align or identify African Americans at a higher rate improperly as threats for incarceration. So some solutions to this that AI companies have employed are guardrails. And so this is why if you ask ChatGPT to tell you a racist joke, it will push back and won't do that. But guardrails are not the solution. So these are rules around prompts and how the AI is allowed to respond to you. It only serves to mask biases within the system rather than fixing them. It doesn't actually fix the bias. It's similar to if you have a racist friend and you're going to a party with them, your plan is to just cover their mouth whenever you think they're about to say something racist. Because racism might slip out. They still might say things that you don't catch as being racist. It's not solving the problem. It's just you're trying to prevent overt expressions of that racism from seeping out. And so it's not addressing the underlying bias. It's just kind of a Band-Aid fix. Just as an example for this, I asked an AI tool to create an image for me for this presentation. I said, and this is the prompt I gave it: two friends at a party where one is saying racist things and the other is trying to cover their mouth and smooth things over to convince everyone that they're a good person. Make the first person cover the mouth of the second. The racist one doesn't want their mouth covered, so they are fighting back a little. So as I read that, kind of think about what image you're seeing in your head. Like when I kind of prompted that, I was thinking, you know, putting myself into it, I'm thinking these are two white males. And and I had an image of this in my head. But then once I actually ran it through the AI, this is what I got. And I ended up running it 3 different times. And after 3 generations, it was always women. They were always light brown skin. And so again, if I ran this 100 times, I don't know. Three is not a large sample size, but at the same time, this seems problematic, right? Similarly, I asked AI in preparation for this, to give me an image of a person talking through a bullhorn-like machine saying racist things that are filtered to be more politically correct. This is what it generated, and it marked it as explicit. So I had to click a button to say I'm okay with seeing an explicit image in order to see this. Then I just changed the prompt slightly to say a person talking through bullhorn-like machine saying nice things that are filtered to be angry, and it generated this. And it was not marked as explicit. And so putting them side by side, we see one that is prompted where the person is saying racist things. The person generated as black and it's marked as explicit, versus one that I said the person is saying nice things. the person is generated as white and is not marked as explicit. Now, I did not run this 100 times or anything like this to do a fully legitimate experiment, but as we do things like this, it at least should make us pause and consider what are the biases shaping the outputs that AI is giving us. A fifth problem is degradation and hallucination. So AI models will degrade over time. And part of the reason for this is when we're tuning a large language model to improve its performance on certain tasks, that can actually have a lot of unintended consequences, which might actually hurt this model's performance on other tasks. So it's very similar to if I'm an athlete, if I'm going to train to be a ballet dancer, the processes I go through to become a ballet dancer actually might be contrary to helping me to become a good power lifter. You do different things, and someone training to be a gymnast will not do the same things that someone becoming a football player would do. And in many ways, what makes you a great gymnast might actually make you a poor football player, and vice versa. And this also plays out in AI being, exhibiting very high levels of false confidence in what it's saying. It will be confidently tell us lies often. And the last one, I think it's the last one, but it's sycophancy. And this is one that's become even more apparent in recent years, as I think specifically ChatGPT does this, but others do it as well, where the AI will kind of just encourage you or prompt you in your own, often in your own ignorance or in your own positionality, rather than often challenging how you're thinking about things. And this is just a continuation of what we've already seen with social media and tools that we've used for decades now that put us into filter bubbles that try to stroke our ego or try to predict what it is we want to hear and then tell us what we want to hear and give us only the information that is aligning with what our pre-existing biases or beliefs are. Okay, and the last one is unsustainability. So with ChatGPT, we recently saw this just this last year. Sam Altman back in 2024 said ads were the last resort for OpenAI as a business model. And then in January of this year, ChatGPT launches ads. And just a couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago, they appointed their first uh, head of global ads solutions. And so, well, what does that mean? Well, it means in part that now as we continue to use these tools and as they evolve, increasingly the outputs that they're providing are going to be influenced by advertising influences. So where can we direct you to buy products and those kinds of things? We've also seen this play out in even elections and how these tools are being used to influence elections and influence political thinking. So with all of this, I think we're in a really kind of challenging position with AI and thinking about, we have these really powerful tools before us. And to think that, well, they've destroyed OER or OER no longer has a purpose or openness no longer has a purpose. I think that the position we're in right now should rather lead us to ask, how can OER and openness provide the vision of an AI future we actually want? So specifically in education, but I think also broadly, how can the kind of heart or guidance or frameworks that openness brings to us help shape and address some of these problems that we have with AI currently? So some ways that I think openness can help lead to the AI future we want, I'll talk through these 5, are that we can work to encourage OER as training data. We can cache high impact uses as OER. We can develop AI literacy and sustainable algorithms. We can nurture open critical pedagogies, and we can use local, open, low power AIs. So I'll talk through each of these in part. First of all, by encouraging OER as training data, there's just so much OER available now. Wikipedia is a key example of this. There's just so much data on Wikipedia. You could train it in an AI on, but there are lots of other tools out there that have tons and tons of data. So if we are using these as our training sources, then it would mean we would not have the same issues that we've been having with AI in terms of intellectual property, at least the exact same kinds of challenges we've been having with AI in terms of intellectual property. This would help to address the issues of opaqueness and exploitation to some extent. Like we wouldn't be exploiting the digital creations of folks that have not released their content under an open license. And it would allow us to more clearly know what our data sets are being trained on. The second is to cache high impact uses as OER. So as I've looked at kind of the interface of AI and OER over these few years, the solution tends to be to kind of just put AI within OER. So if I have an open resource, let me go embed an AI agent in that or a chatbot in that. Um, versus maybe there are high impact practices that we can use AI for to improve OER that then we cache and provide at scale to people. Some examples of this are something as simple as a glossary. Rather than having an AI tool that allows you to define a term um, um, for that you don't recognize, we can build systems that use AI to define a term, but then cache that term so then that can be provided to anyone. So what that means is that you don't need to have your own access to the AI to define terms. And also you don't have to rely upon power-hungry AI processes, which we'll talk more in depth about in a second, to generate this definition every single time someone wants it. But you just store it, you generate it once, you store it, and then you provide that definition to everybody. So I built this into my textbooks platform, my open textbook platform. Some other examples of this are generating learning checks. So rather than feeding me as a student, feeding my reading to AI and asking it to give me to quiz me on the content, why doesn't the OER creator just feed that to AI themselves, generate learning checks and provide the learning check as OER to learners? We're doing this with audiobooks as well. So all the content in our platform, we use AI to generate audiobooks for, but we generate the audiobook once and then we store the output, the MP3 output that then we can distribute at scale. So people in India or the Philippines don't need to have access to an AI tool to generate an audiobook. We generate it for them and then we provide it to them at practically no cost to anybody. And translations as well. So rather than having people in Egypt or Indonesia run our content through an AI to translate it into their home language, we as a platform can translate can build systems that use our AI system to translate it once, and then we store that translation so then it is provided at scale to anyone who is accessing it afterwards. So rather than having my 100 students in Indonesia, excuse me, translate the reading, I, as the instructor, can translate it once, and I provide that translation to all of them. So they don't need access to an AI. They don't need to use an AI, and we don't need to use power-hungry resources power-hungry tools to translate it 100 times. We just translate it once and provide that translation as an OER itself. So I think caching high-impact uses as OER solves a lot of the problems that we're seeing with AI. It addresses the inequity problem because we can cache those resources and provide them to everyone equitably. It addresses the issue of opaqueness because, for instance, if I'm using it for translation, I, as the instructor or as the content creator, can use AI to translate materials, and then I can verify that it's accurate and adjust it as needed. Similarly, that helps to address bias and degradation because I can help to ensure quality because I'm now positioning myself as the OER provider between the learner and the AI rather than having the learner interacting directly with the AI, and addresses these other problems as well. A third solution is that we need to develop AI literacy and sustainable algorithms for in how we're using AI. So we tend to we just need to recognize that tools are different and they should be used for different purposes. So what we're using ChatGPT for, what it excels at is not the same thing that Google excels at, and is not the same thing that Merriam-Webster Dictionary excels at. So for a simple example for why this is important, if I use ChatGPT, if I put in a prompt to define the word light bulb into ChatGPT, the amount of energy required to answer that would power a 60-watt equivalent light bulb for about 3 minutes. That's quite a bit of power. Versus if I put the same prompt into Google, the amount of power necessary to give me an answer for that would only power that light bulb for about 30 seconds. This was pre-Gemini when I figured this out, but we can talk about that in a second. Versus if I just put the term into Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the amount of power to give me the answer to that is less than 1 second of power for the light bulb. So all that's to say, these tools are not equal in terms of their power consumption. And what we have found at least initial studies on how, for instance, teens use AI is it tends to be for low-level information retrieval purposes by and large. And so if they're using ChatGPT to define terms or to tell them what the quadratic formula is or something like that, they'd be much better served for using lower power tools to do that. In addition, not all AIs are ecologically equal. They don't all use the same amount of power. So for instance, Llama 3.2, 1 billion parameter model versus the ChatGPT 4 model, which no one knows exactly how many parameters it has, but it's predicted to be about almost 2 trillion with only about 400 billion active. Um, the amount of power between so if you put the same prompt into those two, the amount of power to answer your question with Llama 3.2 is like 1/400th of what ChatGPT requires. So sending the same prompt to ChatGPT 4 uses roughly 400 times more energy than it takes to run the same prompt through Llama 3.2. And so what this means is that often the way that we're using AI, it's similar to if I need to go to the grocery store that or to the corner store that's only a block or two away, I can walk, I can drive my car, or I can take a rocket ship. And the way that we're using AI tools typically now is we're taking rocket ships to the corner store, which is really detrimental to our environment and very problematic in lots of ways. So an algorithmic scenario of how this might play out, and I say algorithm here, meaning like, I mean, we can develop literacies in helping people understand and helping our students and ourselves understand how and when to use AI and which tools to use. But we can also build and bake this into the tools themselves. And so, for instance, if we have 100 students asking an AI prompt, should we send it through a low power model first? So should we send them to a Llama 3.2 first, or should we send them directly to ChatGPT? Well, if we send them to Llama 3.2, it could possibly be that this low power model doesn't serve the purpose, and so all 100 of those we end up having to run through ChatGPT as well. And so in that case, like we have 100 additional prompts that we're running. But the thing is that because running a prompt through Llama is 1/300th or 400th of the cost of what it takes to run it through ChatGPT, even if one of those can be answered by sending it to Llama first, then we have a net benefit to cost savings and net benefit to energy savings. So even if 1 out of 100 we can solve, we can address with the lower power model, we should do it that way because it'll be a net energy savings. Gemini does things like this with like Google search, for instance. So if you do Google search, not everything you search for will return a Gemini result because Google on its back end is doing an algorithm similar to this. So if you type in the word dog, for instance, to Google search, it probably will not give you a Gemini output versus if you say, why do dogs have 6 legs? It will give you a Gemini output. So on their back end, they are deciding what prompts are worthwhile to expend the energy on to send to the AI versus which ones are not. So by developing literacies in AI and developing algorithms that create like a triaged or a nested approach to using AI models, starting with lower power models and moving to higher power models, helps to address all of these issues because it reduces the impact or the cost and energy necessary to use these models, and it allows us to understand more deeply kind of what we're doing with them. Solution 4, nurturing open critical pedagogy. So central to the research and work that's always been done with OER and openness is conversation about how this translates into the pedagogies that we use in our classrooms and in our institutions. So a lot of this, I think you can trace back to, for instance, Foucault and deconstructionism, but also Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, and thinking through how the power structures that are in place shape our how we approach pedagogy and teaching and learning. And openness challenges a lot of those institutional structures. So on the left here, we have the panopticon, which was created by Jeremy Bentham, what that Foucault uses as a metaphor for the modern state, modern surveillance state, where in this prison, a guard can stand in the center and see what's happening in any cell around the panopticon. This similar kind of model has been applied to understand a lot of different institutions or institutional structures that exist in modern society, everything from government oversight to, but also in education, how we use tools and data, LMSs even, to spy on students or to control students. And so the conversations that we've been having for decades in openness related to how we should be challenging institutional structures related to um, pedagogies and our educational systems apply increasingly apply with AI and should apply in these settings. So we need educators and students who value and can enact these values that I think are core and connected to openness, that value and can enact democratization, equity, human dignity, collaboration, sharing, generosity, truth and truthfulness, factual accuracy, transparency, and shared power. None of these things are implicit in AI. None of these things, if we just say AI now replaces OER and openness, all of these values and these core tenets go out the window. They can in some way be connected with AI, but what openness and OER does, it gives us the grounding and the moral framework necessary to use AI in ways that are socially responsible, by connecting our educational practice directly to these values and morals. And so in that way, I think nurturing open and critical pedagogies help to address most of the problems, again, that we're seeing with AI. And then a final solution is to use local, open, and low power AIs. And I think we'll increasingly see more um, um, as AI models become more sophisticated and more lean, and as technologies advance, like quantization of AI models, for instance, they'll increasingly be able to run on low power systems, and we won't need like a $90,000 server to run a robust AI model. And this is happening right now. Lots of large language models are available for download onto even your laptop right now that you can run locally. Ollama is one tool that allows you to do this very easily and quickly in both Mac and PC. Um, One proof of concept that I've done with this is working with some schools in India where we basically set up their own local AI system within a school that allows them to, if they're connected to the school Wi-Fi with any device, they can just talk to this AI Benjamin to answer their questions. So they can ask it like, who was Boudica? It'll answer the question. And this is all running locally on a low power server that is basically the size of a cheeseburger, sitting in a rack in their school. And so the amount of power needed to run this is very minimal. It provides access to, and then we can also scale up and do higher level models with it as well if needed. Similar kind of approach I've also implemented in our open textbook platform. So for instance, if you go to edtechbooks.org, if you go to any reading, you now see a Benjamin icon down the bottom right. You click on it, you can ask it to, questions about the content that you're on. This runs through a Llama 3.2 1 billion parameter model. So it's a very efficient AI model that can give you answers about the content that you're studying. And so using these local, open, and low power AIs address a lot of the problems, again, that we're running into with these tools. We don't need massive 9 gigawatt data centers if we are, um, as a society, are more efficiently using the resources that are available to us in terms of the local tools that we have and the models that we're using. So are OER and openness obsolete in the world of AI? I don't think so. And I think specifically they're not obsolete because of the heart and the core values associated with openness, openness has never been about a technology. It is about instantiating value systems into the tools that we're using. And that's what's missing with AI. And so I've provided some example solutions here, or some example ways that I think the two interface. But ultimately, I think if we want a future at all, but certainly a good future, we have to increasingly as a society try to understand how AI can be used and should be developed ethically and morally and in ways that benefit society and support human flourishing. And openness and OER has that framework, or at least the starting of a framework that allows us to do that and understand how to use technologies to do that. And so it seems to me that openness and OER are even more important today than they were even 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Because, having conversations about openness 15 years ago was all about providing equitable access to people. But now it's a question about our existence as a race. Now it's a question about do we even have access to, like, who controls information? And so in many ways, I think that OER and openness probably serve an even more important space today than they have earlier in my career. So I'll stop there, and I know hopefully that sparked some questions from all of you, and I'd love to have some deeper conversations with you all about this topic.